A reading from Psalm 111. Praise the Lord. I thank the Lord with all my heart, in the company of those who do right in the congregation. The works of the Lord are magnificent. They are treasured by all who desire them. God's deeds are majestic and glorious. God's righteousness stands forever. God is famous for his wondrous works. The Lord is full of mercy and compassion. God gives food to those who honor him. God remembers his covenant forever. God proclaimed his powerful deeds to his people and gave them what had belonged to other nations. God's handiwork is honesty and justice. All God's rules are trustworthy. They are established always and forever. They are fulfilled with truth and right doing. God sent redemption for his people. God commanded that his covenant last forever. Holy and awesome is God's name. Fear of the Lord is where wisdom begins. Sure knowledge is for all who keep God's laws. God's praise lasts forever. The word of the Lord.
Let us love, comes the invitation from the beloved community. That community following Jesus so long that defined their whole beings by it. Let us love, little children. They encouraged each other as if this love was something that was yet unknown and needed to be practiced, like a baby carefully watching the footsteps of others until she finally discovers her own feet can move in this way, wobbly and imperfect, but still walking, still following in the way. Let us love, little children, not in word or in speech, but as if our whole bodies are learning this new grace. Let us be bold in learning this new movement, for we will falter, and it won't be perfect, just as we are not perfect. Little children, it will feel new and awkward, and it should. It should feel strange to twist and turn our bodies into love's possibility. To learn how to love in the way of Christ, who is still trying to encourage us to love one another. Let this be what defines us now, in this moment. Not so that they will know that we are Christians, but so that we know who that God's love abides. God's love abides in me. God's love abides in you. I am in you, and you are in me, and this changes everything. That is our prayer right now, that we will come to believe enough that God's love abides in us and be so changed. O Christ, may it be so.
In the liturgical season after Easter, we celebrate resurrection. And I don't think it's a coincidence that we celebrate resurrection in the spring, when creation seems to be coming back to life after winter. Our spiritual practice this morning is a reflection and discussion. There are 2 questions. Feel free to reflect on them in silence or in writing, or to discuss them with those around you. The first question: where in your life have you experienced a death or a loss? This could be a literal death, a relationship that's run its course, the loss of a job, whatever that loss looks like for you. And the second question: where do you have hope for resurrection or new life? It could be in that same area of loss or in a different area. May you experience new life today. Ephesians 5, 8 through 14. You were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. So live your life as children of the light. Light produces fruit that consists of every sort of goodness, justice, and truth. Therefore, test everything to see what's pleasing to the Lord, and don't participate in the unfruitful actions of darkness. Instead, you should reveal the truth about them. It's embarrassing to even talk about what certain persons do in secret, but everything exposed to the light is revealed by the light. Everything that is revealed by the light is light. Therefore, it says, wake up, sleeper, get up from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. The word of the Lord.
We are continuing our sermon series on shame and shame resilience. Much of what we talk about comes from Brené Brown's research on shame. We focus on mental health here a lot at Resonate. Last year, we went through her book, Atlas of the Heart, and we will be republishing those sermons soon. Our goal is to give you a biblical perspective on mental health and self-care. None of us are licensed counselors, but we highly support that you go into and seek therapy if need be with a licensed counselor, and taking medication when need be as well. If you want more steps, please reach out and we can connect you with the correct resources. I do believe that there is a great biblical mandate to focus on you, your health, both mental and physical, as well as supporting your spiritual selves. We are a whole people. We like to think that the spiritual is separate from the physical, but the way that your body or mind is functioning directly impacts all of you, even relationship to God. It's pretty basic, but I base it on two things. First, the idea is that the capacity in which we care and love ourselves directly impacts the way in which we care and love others. Jesus speaks in Mark 12. One of the legal experts heard their dispute and saw how well Jesus answered them. He came over and asked him, which commandment is the most important of all? Jesus replied, the most important one is, Israel, listen, our God is the one Lord, and you must love your Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your being, with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. The second is this, you will love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandment is greater than these. The legal expert said to him, well said, teacher. You have truthfully said that God is one, and there is no other beside him. And to love God with all of your heart, a full understanding, and all of one's strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself is much more important than all kinds of entirely burned offerings and sacrifices. The second biblical premise to focus on mental health is the idea of Sabbath. In the created order of things, humanity was designed to take rest. When we rest, we allow those who have less than us rest as well. When we rest, we are more effective and carry less stress. We as a global whole do not rest, and our societies, our environment, and our health are taking a massive toll because of this. I hope what you get most out of this sermon series is two things. Take shame seriously and know that you are important enough to heal. From 2019 to 2020, mental health issues, specifically anxiety and depression, increased 6-fold. I would offer an explanation that we went through a hard anthropological shift from a guilt-based society to a shame-built society. Just take a moment and think about all that happened in 2020 and 2021. COVID, campaigns, election, insurrection, riots and protests, mantras like woke, BLM, or cancel culture. There was a lot that has happened in these last few years, really too much. So social media fueled, our society has switched. Shame is an intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of acceptance and belonging. We all have shame inside of us. Things trigger this. Being whole human and loving yourselves so that you can love God and others is knowing these triggers and working through them in our lives. Last week, Kevin talked about how Scripture never reports that Jesus carried our shame and took our shame away. Jesus despised shame. He knew shame, but didn't take our shame away from us. I thought, then why do we all believe that then? Jesus took the cross of my shame. And then it hit me while I was watching Sing 2 with my son. We don't believe this because the Bible tells us so. We believe this because Bono says so. I still haven't found what I'm looking for is a wonderful song and gives a hopeful message of still searching, even though believing that Jesus would take away this internal shame. I think that's what we all want, our shame to just go away. Without understanding of external triggers or resilience training, it won't. Having more faith won't save you. It will only shame you more when your efforts don't work. This is why I want to focus on 3 main external factors that trigger shame: judgment, trauma, and secrecy or silence. Our first shame trigger is judgment. When I think about judgment, it's the idea of putting myself over the person or thing that I am judging. I'm taking power. When I judge myself, I am putting myself under that which I am judging by. I'm giving my power away. When Jesus talks about judging others in Matthew 7, he gives the idea of equality. You want to judge, you will be judged by the same standard. It reads, "Don't judge, so that you won't be judged. You'll receive the same judgment you give. Whatever you deal out will be dealt out to you. Why do you see the splinter that's in your brother's eye, but you don't even notice the log that's in your own? How can you say to your brother or sister, 'Let me take that splinter out of your eye,' when there's a log in your own eye? You deceive yourself. First, take the log out of your eye, and then you'll see clearly to take the splinter out of your brother's or sister's eye." Also, Paul, in Romans 1, gives a list of sins, and due to a really unfortunate chapter break, the connecting thought between sin and judgment is missed. In Romans 2:1, Paul writes, "So every single one of you who judge others is without excuse. You condemn yourself when you judge another person, because the one who is judging is doing the same things." I believe this verse is very relevant to the conversation of who we allow or disallow into our church communities, or the behaviors that are accepted or unacceptable. Basically, what Paul is saying is that's not our call. Our call is to love God, self, and others, not judge. Many might say that we are to judge, not condemn. To be human is to judge. It's part of our limbic system, a part of our brain that tells us when we are in danger and when we are not. We have this gut feelings about a situation or person. I think that falls more in line with discernment, and this is for self-protection. Part of the endemic of mental health crisis is the idea of judging others and letting them know that they are on the outside. Truly, this is on all sides of every spectrum, even political. If someone says a specific word or phrase, it acts as a banner to where they find themselves leaning. We want to think that the world exists in this binary system that's black and white, right or wrong, in or out. That is what judging does, tells us what's outside of our wishful binary systems. Creation is non-binary. What is right for me may not be right for you. Not everyone will probably want to go out and ride your bike for 100 miles today. I would love to do that today, but I can't. The way that we make decisions is based on a tiny bit of logic and a truckload of emotions. Almost every decision you made today is non-binary. Maybe you had some of this or that's, because this or that is what you reduced your thousands of options down to. I'll give you that. The human psyche is really complex and exists in dimensions that we are only scientifically beginning to understand. Christians, as in Romans 1 and 2, are not to judge lifestyle choices. We are called to love. I wish the church would spend less time defining who was out and more time trying to figure out how to get everyone around the table, no matter what. I have no idea the story that someone has lived through to push them to make decisions that they did, and I can't make that judgment call. The individual person that receives our harshest judgment, however, is ourselves. Unless you've done a lot of self-work to improve your self-talk, and self-acceptance, I definitely haven't. I fill the sentences in of I should be blank. It's never I am enough. This goes squarely back into loving ourselves so that we can love others. If we cannot figure out how to love ourselves, judge and condemn ourselves so harshly, we will do the same to other people. With our negative self-talk, when that's the only head voice we have, we'll be negative about others. We can make lists of things that we don't like about ourselves or want to change, but struggle when we have to self-affirm. I'm going to get into some maybe realistic application later, but for now, sit with the idea that perhaps if we were less judgmental to ourselves, we would have better relationships with those around us. Speaking on the opposite extreme, there are those that truly believe that they are in the right and do nothing wrong. This is basic narcissism. And when we talk about judging yourselves or self-care, I'm not advocating for this type of hubris. Clinical narcissism is defined as a lifelong pattern of exaggerated feelings of self-importance and an excess need of admiration, a diminished ability or unwillingness to empathize with others' feelings, and interpersonal exploitative behavior. Don't be a narcissist. That term is highly overused when we only focus on self and not reaching out with empathy to another. We are judging them to be less important than ourselves. Paul writes in Philippians 2, "Don't do anything for selfish purposes, but with humility think of others as better than yourselves." Instead of each person watching out for their own good, watch out for what is better for others. The idea here is that if everyone is looking out for one another, you will also be looked out after. This cannot be done in a judgmental environment. The second external shame trigger is trauma. Trauma is becoming a very hot topic in our academic and practitioner environments right now. I was in a conversation with Sherwood's head librarian about how she recently published a paper on trauma-informed practices within the context of library services. We have all experienced trauma, some great and really truly evil, and some simple. I really don't have any other better words to describe trauma than violence and hate. From children being abused or neglected by their parents, to soldiers and other victims of PTSD, to rejection of friends or self over and over again. We have to consider that all trauma is processed the same way. And done without help and community, this trauma is easily and more often than not turns into shame. For those of us old enough on the West Coast, We were nowhere near the falling of the Twin Towers, but still it affected us. We know where we were. Pausing long enough, you can remember and possibly re-engage with the emotions that were inside of us. I remember watching the news alone that it was happening, saw the second plane hit the tower, hopped in the bus, and then spent my entire day in 7th grade art class watching the news. Peter Jennings broadcasted for 17 hours straight and guided us through. What happened afterwards is what Kevin will be talking about next week. We began searching for connection. We have trauma that happened directly to us, trauma that happened away from us, that we still feel connected to. And the third trauma is a newer and developing science. There's a concept that I learned not long ago about generational trauma, trauma passed down from family member to family member, even genetically. The book that came out, one of the books I highly recommend for personal understanding, is It Didn't Start With You. I want to read you their appendixed questionnaire for family trauma and history. The questions are: who died early? Who left? Who was abandoned, isolated, or excluded from the family? Who was adopted, or who gave a child up for adoption? Who died in childbirth? Who had a stillbirth, miscarriage, or abortion? Who committed suicide? Who committed a serious crime? Who experienced a significant trauma or suffered a catastrophic event? Who lost their home, possessions, and had difficulty recovering? Who suffered in war? Who died or participated in the Holocaust or some other genocide? Who was murdered? Who murdered someone or felt responsible for someone's death or misfortune? Who hurt, cheated, or took advantage of someone? Who profited from another's loss? Who was wrongly accused? Who was jailed or institutionalized? Who had a physical, emotional, or mental disability? Which parent or grandparent had a significant relationship prior to getting married, and what happened? It may be a little too simplistic, but humans are just balls of trauma and emotion bumping into each other, trying to figure out our relationships. We do need trauma in order to grow. When you exercise, you break down your body in order for it to regrow into something better and stronger. When we learn, we have to break our old ideas and preconceptions and add to them or wipe them away. Learning new ideas is traumatic. I don't know why this was so shocking to me, but it wrecked me for quite some time, that George Washington's teeth weren't wooden. You can look that up later. Psychologists working in trauma and PTSD have come up with 3 main concepts in dealing with this very human experience: that we are to realize the prevalence of trauma. Everyone has experienced some type of trauma in their lives. Jesus himself suffered trauma. We just went past Easter Sunday, the Good Friday, that Jesus was completely rejected, abandoned, had his body skinned, and then was nailed to a piece of wood. Also in the Garden of Gethsemane, Luke writes, he was in anguish and prayed even more earnestly. His sweat became like drops of blood falling on the ground. The second concept is how trauma affects all individuals involved with the program, organization, or system. We know that everyone has trauma, and our trauma may rub up against one another. And the third idea is that by responding and putting knowledge into practice, it makes us ask the question, what are we going to do with this? The third external factor, or trigger to shame, that I want to talk about today is probably the most caustic. It's silence and secrecy. I had someone recently tell me an old story from their childhood. Their father had just had a heart attack at a very young age. They were on the mend, but still not doing well. Their grandfather moved in with them while their dad recovered to help. In the middle of the night, the grandfather snuck into the room and assaulted the child. The next morning, the child told their mother in response. The mother told the child never to speak of it again, and if they told their father, it would kill him. And so the young child hid for the rest of their life. If you think about familial trauma, questionnaire earlier, this checked many of the boxes. If you've experienced anything like this, there's another questionnaire that I encourage that you look at. It's called the ACE. I won't read it because it could draw out way too much than it's safe in this space to do so. No other trigger will fester shame like silence or secrecy. When we are told to stay quiet or keep secret what happened to us, we are shamed from expressing our whole humanity and kept from healing. We don't want to express our traumas for fear that it might hurt someone else. This also goes back to judging. We are putting our emotions and pain under our assumptions on whether or not someone else will be uncomfortable, hurt, or angry with what we have to say. If expressing our emotions in a safe and productive way does this to another person, if it makes them uncomfortable or retaliate, that is abuse. This doesn't give us the right to unload on people what we are feeling all the time in unsafe ways. That is also abuse. But the more we talk about our shame, embarrassments, judgments, traumas, really what happened to us, that is where healing comes from, and it all comes to the start of. Shame festers because we don't talk about it safely. We feel like we are the only ones dealing with this, or no one else has experienced what we are going through. That is a lie that we tell ourselves so we don't have to change, because change is really, really scary. Brené Brown's first book, I Thought It Was Just Me, But It Isn't, deals with this concept. If we do not talk about our shame, talk about what holds us back, if we are not vulnerable, we will not heal from our shame. Shame is a web that we get caught up in, which is the only way out is empathetic, internal and external conversations. Paul writes that Sharia read earlier in Ephesians 5, "You were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. So live your life as children of light. Light produces fruit that consists of every sort of goodness, justice, and truth. Therefore, test everything to see what's pleasing to the Lord, and don't participate in the unfruitful actions of darkness. Instead, you should reveal the truth about them. It's embarrassing to even talk about what certain persons do in secret, but everything exposed to the light is revealed by the light. Everything that is revealed by the light is light. Therefore, it says, wake up, sleeper, get up from the dead, and Christ will shine on you." I don't have much for application because that is not where we are at in this shame resilience journey. Next, Kevin will be talking about ways out of shame that I brushed up against this morning, but in greater detail. I do want to leave you with two basic ideas when it comes to the triggers of shame. First is that we are to know and speak our story. Psychoanalyst Carl Jung talks about the need that all humans have to be the hero in their own story. In the hero's journey, the story cannot happen without some sort of struggle. Know your story and be able to tell it. Know your struggle and be able to communicate it. If you can't find your story yet, I encourage you to seek counseling and therapy to do so. Second is that we need to change the internal conversation that we have with ourselves and the external conversation that we have with others. Instead of asking the question, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with you? We need to ask the question, what happened to me? What happened to you? Oprah concludes her book, What Happened to You, by writing this: I think that's what the world needs more of right now. When you're able to see another person, that's true compassion, and extending yourself in compassion to another human being changes the nature of our relationships, our communities, and our world. The acknowledgement of one human being by another is what bonds us. Asking, what happened to you, expands the human connection.
Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 11, I received a tradition from the Lord, which I also handed on to you. On the night on which he was betrayed, the Lord Jesus took bread. After giving thanks, he broke it and said, This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. He did the same thing with the cup after they had eaten, saying, This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Every time you drink it, do this in remembrance of me. Every time you eat this bread and drink this cup, you broadcast the death of the Lord until he comes again. So when we gather together, we remember Jesus through the act of communion. Communion gives the idea of togetherness. All around the world, every day, believers and searchers perform communion. It's a simple act. It's just bread and wine. But it is in the pause, the remembering, and the thanksgiving that our hearts are turned outward towards others. So communion is for all. No matter where you are in your faith journey, the table is open for you. All that is required from us is that you have a truthful conversation of where your heart is at with Jesus. Jesus knows us, our deepest and darkest and brightest, and we are all invited to the table of communion. So we take the bread and we dip it in the juice, the fruit of the vine. We remember the sacrifice of Jesus and the reason that we are here today. Take and eat. And we say, thanks be to God.